So, you know the quote from Arthur Schopenhauer I mentioned, or at least I referenced, I don't know if I quoted him, in the last video, about how if you are consuming content, in the context of the reference, reading, but if you're consuming content and you're not taking the time to think about it yourself, you're just consuming it, and then moving on to the next thing without stopping and pausing and thinking about it and adding your thoughts, then effectively what you're just doing is assuming the thoughts of somebody else. You're letting somebody else think for you. So I want to just say something right up front before I criticize something in the show. And that's okay for some people. In fact, I think for a lot of people, thinking perfectly independently about everything is not something everybody is equally good at, is equally gifted in, is equally skilled in, which means that for a lot of people, first of all, for everybody in some area of their lives, this is true. And for some people in a lot of areas of their lives, it's true that your best bet is actually to let somebody else think for you. So let me give you an example. If I'm having a weird medical problem that I don't understand, and I find a specialist that I genuinely trust, and I believe this guy knows what he's talking about, or at very least he knows way better than I do, and he tells me this is what I really think is happening, and this is your best move. It is smart for me. It's a prudent decision for me to let that guy think for me. Okay. So the basic concept of it's a stupid false notion, this idea that everyone's supposed to be thinking independently for themselves. That's just not true. So anyways, but something I realized with this show as it starts is, the show begins already, like, everybody knows going into the show. Everybody knows enough about Superman to know, like I told you, I mean, I haven't read any of the comics or anything, but even I know Lex Luthor is the villain, Clark Kent, Superman, he's the hero, right? So I look at this and I think I'm annoyed by how the show went, because I'm looking at this objectively and I'm thinking for myself and I'm adding my thoughts to it, and I'm saying they did not present a villain arc for Lex Luthor, or, I mean, I guess this, I don't know, I'll talk about later how, whether or not they present a hero arc for Clark. Maybe they do, but it's just not as strongly as they imply. People act like there's a stronger hero arc for Clark than there really is. And I'm just straight up saying there was not a villain arc for Lex Luthor. And I'm observing that, interesting, even though he was supposed to be the villain and he's supposed to be the hero, that's not what's actually occurring in the show. But I think for a lot of people, they like not having, well, first of all, I thought that was interesting because I thought the show was going to go a different way, and I'll explain that later. I think that's cool that they started out and you go into the show thinking he's going to be the villain, he's going to be the hero, and then things don't quite go exactly how you expect, and it's more interesting, you know? I mean, they already started with a different kind of a premise. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that in the original comics or any of the original stories, Clark and Lex were ever buddies, like when they were teenagers or whatever. I don't think that's a thing. So we're already in like a fictional version of this. We're in a new version of the Superman universe, and things are not quite going exactly the way you expect. And I think that's good. That's good storytelling. That's totally fine. I'm on board. That's why I liked the show, and I kept watching it for 6 seasons. I was in the middle of the 6th season when I stopped. We'll see if I ever finish it. I'll deal with that later. But I think for a lot of people, maybe even most people watching the show, they very much like already knowing who the hero and villain is when they go into it. And they're not looking to see if what's presented is different from that claim. Like I was. I know the claim is Lex is the villain and Clark is the hero, and I'm watching the show and deciding whether or not that they're presenting that as being true, that original claim, that premise that we go into assuming will be true. But I think most people watch it and they just took that for granted. They took it for granted, and then they just rationalized everything around that conclusion. So anything that happens, they made it fit in their mind around the conclusion that Lex is the villain and Clark is the hero. And I'm saying that's not what was actually presented. I feel like what's happening is, do you remember this scene in Megamind, which, by the way, it's an underrated movie, one of my top favorite animated movies ever. So if you haven't seen Megamind, stop this, and just go watch that. And then you can come back to Luthor's Advocate. But anyways, there's a scene in it where baby Megamind is like, he crash lands in prison, and the inmates are like teaching him good and bad, and he's just a little sponge, right? He's a baby, so like you could teach him anything you want. And so they hold up a picture of like a police officer, and they're like, police officer bad, and the little baby shakes his head like, oh, it's bad. And then they hold a picture up of the guy robbing a bank or something like that, and he's like, good, and he's shaking his head. Yeah, anyways, but my point is, like, it's like, That's what I feel like is going on. They're like, ooh, Clark Kent, good. Everybody nods. Lex Luthor, bad. Everyone shakes their head. And like 90% of the audience is not only doing that, but actually prefers that, is what I'm gathering. My point, I guess I'm saying here, is that I realize there's a lot of people who didn't want to do what I did with the show. And that's fine. I think they came to the wrong conclusion, and I'm going to explain why, but like, it's whatever. I get it. Not everybody does this, and not everybody's good at doing it. Not everybody enjoys doing it. So, if anyone out there did just take that for granted and is curious, you can listen to my videos and decide whether you want to let me think for you in this context or not.